What if I told you that every great civilization throughout history has followed the exact same path to destruction? Not war, not natural disasters, not even economic collapse, but something far more insidious. The slow decay of critical thinking is replaced by the worship of ignorance and the celebration of stupidity. Here's the question that should terrify you. We're not just watching this happen, we're living through the final stages right now. Picture this. In 2006, Idiocracy painted a dystopian future where society had devolved into complete intellectual bankruptcy. Fast forward to today, and we're watching reality TV stars become world leaders, while scientists are dismissed as elitists for suggesting we might want to stop poisoning our planet. The parallels aren't just striking, they're a roadmap we're following with disturbing precision. But here's what's truly chilling. This isn't new. From the Roman Empire to the Maya civilization, from ancient China to the Islamic Golden Age, every single advanced society has walked the same path to destruction. They've all reached a point where wisdom became unfashionable, expertise became suspicious, and immediate gratification became more important than long-term survival. Think about it. The Roman Empire once had the most advanced engineering, legal systems, and military organization in the world. The Maya could calculate astronomical events with a precision that rivals modern computers. The Islamic Golden Age gave us algebra and advanced medicine, and preserved the works of Aristotle while Europe was burning books. These weren't primitive societies. They were technological and intellectual powerhouses that somehow lost their way. In 2016, Oxford Dictionaries named post-truth their word of the year, recognizing how objective facts had become less influential than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Meanwhile, false news stories spread 6 times faster than true stories on social media. We're not approaching idiocracy. We're sprinting toward it with our phones in our hands, live streaming our own intellectual demise. The evidence is everywhere if you're willing to see it. Anti-vaccination movements have brought back diseases that were nearly eradicated. Climate change denial persists despite overwhelming scientific consensus. 97% of climate scientists agree on human-caused warming, yet public opinion remains split. Conspiracy theories spread faster than actual information because they're more emotionally satisfying than complex truths. We've reached a point where expertise itself is seen as elitism, where doing your own research means watching TikTok reels instead of reading peer-reviewed studies. So let me ask you directly, when was the last time you changed your mind about something important? When did you last seek out information that challenged your deepest beliefs? If you're struggling to answer, you might already be further down this path than you think. The first stage of civilizational decay always begins the same way: the systematic erosion of critical thinking. It starts subtly, like a crack in a dam that eventually brings down the entire structure. Socrates understood this danger 24 centuries ago. He declared that the unexamined life is not worth living, but Athens responded by forcing him to drink poison. Why? Because he had the audacity to ask uncomfortable questions. For this crime against intellectual complacency, he was executed. The parallel to today is terrifying. We don't need hemlock to silence critical thinkers. We have something far more effective. Social media algorithms designed to feed us exactly what we want to hear. People are 6 times more likely to share false information than accurate news, particularly when it confirms their existing beliefs. Look at the 2016 Brexit referendum. Cambridge Analytica used psychological profiling to target voters with personalized political ads designed to exploit their specific fears and biases. Rather than engaging with complex arguments about trade policy, millions made one of the most consequential decisions in British history based on emotionally manipulative Facebook feeds. Even many Brexit supporters later admitted they didn't fully understand what they were voting for. This is critical thinking dying in real time, replaced by psychological manipulation masquerading as democratic participation. consider ancient Rome. The Roman Republic was built on vigorous debate, with citizens gathering in the forum to argue about policy and governance. Cicero's speeches were studied for their logical structure. Senators were expected to demonstrate knowledge of history, philosophy, and law. But as the empire grew wealthy and comfortable, something fundamental shifted. The poet Juvenal wrote about bread and circuses, how the Roman people had traded their civic responsibility for entertainment and free food. They stopped asking hard questions about their leaders and focused on gladiatorial games instead. When was the last time you saw a complex policy debate trend on social media? When did you last see people sharing detailed analyses instead of memes and sound bites? Today, we're systematically dismantling the institutions that teach critical thinking. Between 1970 and 2018, the percentage of college students majoring in humanities dropped from 17% to just 8%. Philosophy, literally the love of wisdom, is being cut from university programs across the Western world. We're eliminating the disciplines that teach us how to think, how to question, and how to examine ideas critically. But it's not just formal education. Look at how we consume information today. The average person spends less than 15 seconds reading an article before sharing it on social media. We've trained ourselves to react to headlines rather than engage with content. Our attention spans have shortened to the point where complex ideas can't compete with simple slogans and emotional triggers. Think about your own education. Were you taught how to think, or just what to think? Were you encouraged to question authority or to comply with it? The answer might explain more about our current crisis than you realize. When critical thinking dies, it doesn't happen overnight. It's like watching a forest succumb to disease. First, a few trees show symptoms, then entire sections wither, until you're left with a wasteland where nothing substantial can grow. The second stage is perhaps the most seductive, the rise of short-term narcissism. This is where civilizations lose their ability to think beyond immediate gratification, where me now becomes more important than us later. Alexis de Tocqueville warned about this in his analysis of American democracy. He observed that democratic societies could become so focused on individual comfort that they would gradually surrender their capacity for long-term thinking. He called it soft despotism, not harsh tyranny, but the gentle tyranny of endless entertainment and instant satisfaction. Friedrich Nietzsche had an even sharper analysis. He wrote about the last men, people who would become so obsessed with comfort and security that they would lose all capacity for greatness, for sacrifice, for thinking beyond their own lifespans. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? He imagined these last men asking, blinking with confusion at concepts that required them to look beyond their immediate needs. The Maya civilization provides a perfect example. At their peak, the Maya were extraordinary astronomers and mathematicians. They built cities that lasted for centuries and developed a calendar more accurate than our own. But when their population began to strain their resources, they faced a crucial choice: immediate comfort or long-term sustainability. They chose immediate comfort despite clear evidence of deforestation, soil depletion, and water scarcity. Maya leaders continued to expand their cities and maintain their luxurious lifestyles. They had the knowledge to predict eclipses centuries in advance, but they lacked the wisdom to apply that same long-term thinking to their ecological crisis. Today, we're facing our own Maya moment with climate change. We have more scientific knowledge about our planetary systems than any civilization in history. We can model climate patterns decades into the future with remarkable accuracy. Yet our response has been shaped entirely by short-term thinking, quarterly earnings reports, election cycles, and immediate political gains. Here's a question that cuts to the heart of everything. If you knew with absolute certainty that your lifestyle choices today would determine whether your grandchildren inherit a livable planet, Would you change anything about how you live? And if the answer is yes, why haven't you already? A 2011 study by Hirschfield showed we're wired to sabotage our future selves. Brain scans reveal that people perceive their older selves almost like strangers, making it easier to chase TikTok dopamine hits today instead of saving for retirement. This isn't stupidity. It's a deep-rooted bias in human psychology. However, successful civilizations learn to overcome these biases through institutions, traditions, and cultural practices that enforce long-term thinking. Consider the 2008 financial crisis. Wall Street executives knew that subprime mortgages were fundamentally unsustainable. Internal emails later revealed that many called them toxic waste. But because the short-term profits were enormous, they continued selling these products and lobbied against regulations that would have prevented the crisis. When the collapse came, millions lost their homes and savings, but the executives received taxpayer-funded bailouts. This is short-term narcissism at a civilizational level, privatizing profits while socializing the long-term costs. We've created systems that reward immediate gratification and punish long-term wisdom at every level of society. Think about how this plays out in your own life. How many decisions do you make based on what feels good right now versus what's best for your future self? How often do you choose the convenient option over the sustainable one? The psychological patterns that destroy civilizations start with individual choices that seem harmless in isolation, but become catastrophic when multiplied across millions of people. The third and final stage is the most dangerous, the systematic rejection of expertise. This is when civilizations don't just ignore wisdom, they actively attack it. Carl Sagan saw this pattern emerging in modern America, as he wrote, "We've arranged a global civilization in which most crucial elements profoundly depend on science and technology. We have also arranged things so that almost no one understands science and technology. This is a prescription for disaster." Sagan was writing in 1995, before social media, before internet echo chambers, and before the wholesale rejection of scientific expertise that we see today. He understood that when a civilization becomes dependent on the knowledge it doesn't understand, it becomes vulnerable to charlatans and demagogues who promise simple answers to complex problems. Hannah Arendt called this phenomenon the banality of evil. She observed that some of history's greatest atrocities weren't committed by monsters, but by ordinary people who had stopped thinking critically about authority and expertise. They didn't consciously choose evil. They simply stopped engaging with complex ideas and difficult truths. History provides a perfect example of the Ming Dynasty of China. For centuries, the Chinese had been the world's most advanced maritime civilization. Their treasure fleets had reached Africa decades before European explorers. Chinese technology was centuries ahead of the rest of the world. But then something shifted. New emperors came to power who viewed foreign expertise with suspicion. They began to see international trade and technological innovation as threats to traditional values. By the 15th century, they had banned ocean voyages entirely, destroyed their naval fleets, and turned inward. Within a few generations, European powers with inferior technology had surpassed them entirely. The Ming Dynasty didn't fall to foreign invaders, it fell to intellectual isolationism. Today, we're witnessing the same phenomenon on a global scale. Trust in scientific institutions has declined dramatically. The percentage of Americans who trust scientists to act in the public interest dropped from 87% in 1973 to just 57% in 2019. Consider what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. We had the most advanced medical research capabilities in human history, with thousands of experts working around the clock to understand and combat the virus. Yet significant portions of the population chose to trust social media influencers over actual medical professionals. People died because they believed Facebook posts over doctors. Ivermectin, a horse deworming medication, became more trusted than vaccines developed by teams of PhD scientists using decades of research. This isn't just ignorance, it's active hostility toward expertise itself. Even more disturbing was the response to mask mandates and social distancing. These weren't complex medical interventions. They were simple, proven methods that had been used successfully during previous pandemics. Yet they were rejected not on scientific grounds, but because following expert advice was seen as a threat to personal freedom. We reached a point where basic public health measures became political loyalty tests rather than medical necessities. But here's what I want you to honestly consider. How many experts do you actually trust? Your doctor? Your mechanic? The weather forecaster? Now ask yourself why you trust them, but not climate scientists. What's the difference? Is it really about the evidence, or is it about whether their expertise threatens beliefs you're not ready to question? Here's where the pattern becomes truly dangerous. These aren't three separate stages. They're an interconnected spiral where intellectual decay, short-term thinking, and anti-expertise sentiment feed off each other, creating what psychologists call a doom loop. When critical thinking erodes, people become more susceptible to short-term thinking because they can't process complex, long-term consequences. When short-term thinking dominates, people lose patience for the careful work that real expertise requires. When expertise is rejected, decision-making deteriorates, creating more problems and making people more desperate for simple solutions. Climate change represents the ultimate test of whether our civilization can break this cycle. It requires all three things our society is losing: critical thinking about complex systems, long-term planning beyond immediate comfort, and trust in scientific expertise. Yet even here, we see the feedback loop accelerating. A 2020 study found that climate disasters actually decrease support for climate action in affected communities. When people are struggling with immediate crises, they don't have the mental bandwidth for long-term thinking. They want someone to blame, someone to fix things quickly. This is how civilizations die, not in dramatic collapses, but in gradual spirals where each problem makes the next problem harder to solve. The Maya didn't disappear overnight. They slowly lost the ability to coordinate collective action. Rome didn't fall in a day. It gradually lost the civic virtues that had made it great. Are we the Rome in 400 AD telling ourselves everything is fine while the foundations crumble? Or are we the Maya in 800 AD so focused on immediate problems that we can't see the systemic collapse approaching? But here's the crucial point. Some civilizations do break the cycle. Some societies find ways to renew themselves, to rediscover critical thinking, to rebuild their capacity for long-term wisdom. The Renaissance provides the most famous example. Medieval Europe had fallen into its own version of idiocracy. Knowledge was hoarded by religious authorities, critical thinking was discouraged, and most people lived in ignorance. What changed? It wasn't a single leader or a single innovation. It was a cultural shift that placed new values on learning, questioning, and intellectual achievement. The rediscovery of classical texts sparked a renewal of critical thinking. The patronage system supported long-term intellectual projects. The printing press democratized knowledge while maintaining respect for expertise. But why did the Renaissance succeed when so many other potential renewals failed? The key difference was institutional support for long-term thinking. Unlike the Maya, who couldn't overcome their elites' short-term interests, Renaissance Europe created new institutions, universities, scientific societies, artistic academies that rewarded patience, depth, and intellectual rigor over immediate political or economic gains. Compare this to modern South Korea, which transformed from one of the world's poorest countries in 1960 to a technological powerhouse today. How? By making massive, long-term investments in education, particularly in critical thinking skills. They didn't just teach people what to think, they taught them how to think. Meanwhile, Venezuela, despite having the world's largest oil reserves, collapsed because its leaders chose short-term political gains over long-term institutional building. The difference isn't resources, it's the conscious choice to invest in long-term thinking over short-term gratification. The Venetian Republic offers another instructive example. For over 1,000 years, Venice maintained stable, effective governance by creating institutions designed to promote long-term thinking. Their leaders were chosen through complex processes that favored experience over popularity. Their economic policies balanced immediate needs with sustainable practices. Venice succeeded because they understood something that modern democracies have forgotten. Good governance requires deliberate systems to overcome short-term thinking and popular delusions. Civilizational renewal requires conscious effort. It requires people who understand the patterns, who recognize the dangers, and who commit to building something better. The key insight is this: are you one of those people? When you look around at the intellectual chaos of our time, do you see yourself as part of the problem or part of the solution? Because passive spectatorship isn't an option. History shows us that civilizations are saved by people who choose to act, not by people who choose to watch. We need specific, implementable solutions that address each stage of the decline. First, we must rebuild critical thinking from the ground up. In education, we need to integrate metacognition training into curricula from elementary school through university. Instead of just teaching facts, we need to teach students how to evaluate sources, recognize cognitive biases, and think systematically about complex problems. Finland's education system does exactly this, which is why Finnish students consistently outperform others in critical thinking assessments. Second, we need institutions designed for long-term thinking. Wales has implemented a Future Generations Act that requires government decisions to consider their impact 7 generations ahead. What if corporate executives faced personal legal liability for long-term environmental damage? Third, we need to rebuild respect for legitimate expertise while maintaining a healthy skepticism. This means media literacy education that teaches people how to distinguish between credible sources and propaganda. In your personal life, this means choosing intellectual difficulty over comfortable certainty. Seek out information that challenges your beliefs. Support media outlets that prioritize accuracy over entertainment. Make purchasing decisions based on long-term consequences rather than immediate convenience. Most importantly, practice what psychologists call intellectual humility, the recognition that you might be wrong about things you feel certain about. We stand at the same crossroads every great civilization has faced. We can follow Rome and the Mayans into comfortable ignorance until reality forces a harsh awakening. Or we can choose the harder path of renewal, consciously rebuilding our capacity for wisdom. Your role in this renewal starts with honest self-assessment. How often do you choose easy answers over right answers? How often do you share information without verifying it? When did you last change your mind based on evidence rather than emotion? History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The pattern of civilizational decay is as old as civilization itself. But so is the pattern of renewal, of societies that choose wisdom over comfort, knowledge over ignorance, long-term thinking over immediate gratification. The question isn't whether we can avoid the fate of Rome or the Maya. The question is whether we will choose to, whether we'll be remembered as the generation that broke the cycle or completed it. So I'll leave you with the most important question. Knowing what you know now about how civilizations die, what are you personally going to do differently tomorrow? Not what should others do. What will you do? If this video changed how you think about our civilizational moment, there's someone in your life who needs to see this too. That friend who still thinks our problems will somehow solve themselves. that family member who's given up on engaging with difficult ideas, that colleague who's retreated into comfortable certainties. Share this with them, not to be right, but because the conversation about our future can't happen in echo chambers. It has to happen in the uncomfortable spaces where different perspectives collide and real thinking begins. Remember, the future of human civilization doesn't depend on some abstract they. It depends on you, on me, on each of us making different choices. The choice is ours. The time is now. And the stakes couldn't be higher. But here's what I want you to remember. Every great renewal in history started with individuals who refused to accept that decline was inevitable. People who chose the harder path of questions over the easier path of certainties. People who understood that the future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create, one choice at a time. The conversation about tomorrow starts today, and it starts with you.